So you and your friend walk into a noisy bar, and there's 50 or so people in there making a ruckus. Now, the band that you're hearing, the drums, the piano, the guitar, and the bass, that's the ruckus of the 50 or so people. And the fiddle, your friend, is next to you, and because he's closer, he's louder, so he's easier to hear. Now, at this point, your brain does you a favor. Without you thinking about it, your brain tunes out the rest of the people in the bar and just focuses in on the enunciation of your friend next to you so you can hear what they're saying. If your brain didn't do that, you would be hearing the clarity and enunciation of everyone at the bar at the same time, and you'd probably go crazy pretty quick and run out of the bar. But since our brain does that for us, it's actually helping us with frequency masking. But now if a few people at the back of the bar get really loud all of a sudden, your brain will tune into them and what they said, and for that brief moment, it's harder to hear your friend next to you. So in a mix, we can use compression to either help or hinder the situation. If we compress the rest of the bar and keep the dynamic peaks under control, that will help the frequency masking. But if we make the soft-spoken people a little louder, that's going to make the frequency masking worse. If I were to take the faders and turn up the acoustic and the piano and the bass, you're not going to be able to hear the fiddle as well anymore, and it's not going to be the dominant thing in the mix. So compression can help frequency masking, but it can also make it worse. But before we get into that, we're going to take a little tangent that is related, but we're going to talk about resonant frequencies. Resonant frequencies will make it harder for us to hear the compression settings that we need to apply, and harder to hear the masking as well. Maybe you can hear in this fiddle that there's some high-mid resonant frequencies that are kind of harsh. And we can see the little spikes here, and some of this could be proximity effect from the fiddle player not standing perfectly still during recording and stuff like that. But right around 5.2, 5.3, there's a little bit of extra resonance there. And I would say the same around 6.3. And another one here about 7.7. So we have a little extra harshness there, these resonant frequencies in the fiddle that really need to be addressed. So here we've addressed those frequencies. That's almost 5 dB at 7.7K, 8.5 dB at 6.3, and another 4.2 at 5.2K. And we added a little high pass as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the mix on and turn the EQ on and off, and take a listen to not only how much more pleasant the fiddle is to listen to with the EQ on, but also pay attention to the masking going on between the fiddle and the vocal, and how much having those resonant frequencies removed helps the overall picture. Yeah, it's not only way more pleasant with those resonant frequencies removed, but there's more clarity and separation between the fiddle and the vocal without that added harshness. And with those resonant frequencies removed, like I said, it's going to make it easier for us to hear not only the masking, but our compression settings. So I just wanted to cover that real quick. Now, this fiddle does have compression on it. This is Molotok by Tokyo Dawn, and I love this little compressor. In fact, this compressor's never really got a fair shake on this channel so far, but this is a fantastic free compressor for everybody. I highly recommend picking this up if you don't have it. But I'm just doing a couple dB of gain reduction here to keep the peaks under control on the fiddle. And I have a pretty fast attack at 50 milliseconds and a fairly medium release around 250. And if I bypass this, obviously the fiddle has louder louds and quieter quiets with this bypass. Let's pop the mix back on. And I'm going to mute the vocal for a second. And we'll bring the compressor back on and take a listen to the dynamics in the fiddle and how it sits in the mix with the compressor engaged. And I do have that level matched, by the way. But we're obviously going to have less masking between the fiddle and the vocal, with the loud notes being more under control. But with the quiet notes coming up in volume, we're going to increase the masking problem because there's just overall more volume and energy going on in the fiddle. So the compressor is doing both. It's helping certain little peaks with frequency masking, but it's hindering overall masking because it's making quieter stuff louder. And that's just what happens with compression. But I'm going to pop the vocal back in and take a listen to the masking between the fiddle and the vocal with the compressor on and off. Yeah, we definitely want compression on the fiddle, and like I said, it helps for the dynamic peaks, but overall, the fiddle's a little louder and more constant, so it's a little bit more masking. So that's just something to consider. So what we're going to do now is leave this compressor turned on at these modest settings, and going forward, we're going to address the masking between the fiddle and the vocal with dynamic EQ. Dynamic EQs are fantastic for masking because we can use them to just add compression to specific places. And in my opinion, they work better than multiband compressors a lot of the times. So this is TDR NOVA, and it's on the fiddle, and I have a whole tutorial on this free dynamic EQ, which I absolutely love, and I'll link to it in the description. This is a free dynamic EQ that gives us really good dynamic control over certain frequency ranges. So we're going to start with the low end, and we'll work our way up the spectrum. So the fiddle doesn't have a lot of bassy energy at all. Its main presence is in the low mids. But simply squashing the lows, even though there's not much there, we're going to keep what is there under control. So this is a low dynamic shelf at 100 hertz, and I have the threshold clamped down pretty hard, and I have a really good ratio of 8:1, a fast attack, and a fairly fast release. And we're going to watch this threshold kind of breathe and watch the release so we can take a look at what it's doing to the low end of the fiddle. So those notes right there, we don't want those jumping out in the mix. So this dynamic band is going to just be dancing a little bit most of the time, but when there's an increase in low energy, it's going to clamp down on it and just keep it under control. If I set the release too slow, it's basically like just taking a static EQ and turning down the volume on the lows. So I do want it to breathe a little bit, but in general, I want a pretty slow release. There's 500 milliseconds, and let's wait for that big spike right there. And it recovers nice and slow, it's still breathing, but this is a good low-end control, a really healthy ratio. I could even crank this up. There's a ratio of 10:1. Whether this is a lead guitar or any lead instrument that's competing with another lead instrument, it's really helpful to have your low end really dynamically under control. And then I'll bypass this node here, and we'll go back and forth and listen to it with the low compressed and with it not. Yeah, so that is important even though it's subtle. And now we're going to address the low mids. And we have a gentler ratio here of 6:1, a slightly faster attack, and still a pretty slow release, right about 400 milliseconds. It's not going to be compressing all the time, but when they jump beyond a certain point, the threshold is going to pull them back down. So let's take a listen to this off, and then we'll bring it on. Yeah, so we're keeping the dynamics under control in the low mids here, and we have a fairly wide Q. So this is covering basically the 200 to 500 range, and that's going to help the masking between the fiddle and the vocal quite a bit. Let's hear it again. And bypass. Back on. Yeah, the vocal stays out a little bit more on top. And now up in the high mids where the vocal clarity range is, we're just going to compress that range as well on the fiddle just to make sure that there's a little pocket there for the vocal all the time. We can engage the threshold a little more, and we can turn the ratio up. We'll go up to 5:1. Let's try that. Yeah, that's nice. We're just keeping those frequencies under control, which is where her voice really tends to cut through the mix. And now for high frequencies, the thing with high frequencies and compression is it's kind of genre specific. In general, if you overcompress your highs, it'll be prone to being harsh all the time, or at least an equal amount of harshness all the time. And a song like this is a little bit smoother. So what we're going to do is set the high end on the fiddle to more of a limiter setting. I have the ratio cranked to infinite. I have a very fast attack and a pretty fast release. And we're going to bring the threshold down to where whenever the high frequencies jump beyond a certain point, it just puts up like a brick wall for them so they don't go any higher. We're just making sure that that keeps the air of the vocal out on top. So this is a high shelf at 9K. There's just going to be a hard limited threshold there that nothing's going to be able to pass. And we'll engage the threshold a little further. Yeah, there's just a little bit of dancing there. So let's listen to the rest of the fiddle performance and see where the high frequency jumps are here and watch this limiter setting catch them and keep them under control. Yeah, that's nice. That is another subtlety that's going to help us a lot. This is just going to make sure that there's no points in time where the high on the fiddle is going to jump up there and get in the way of the vocal. We don't want to just over-compress this fiddle with a standard compressor because we don't want to decrease the frequencies in the mid-range so much that we're making masking worse. This way we can be more targeted and more specific. And dynamic EQs are just really ideal for this type of work. So let's pop the full mix back on, and then we're going to bypass the dynamic EQ on the fiddle and listen to the masking between the fiddle and the vocal with all of our nodes off and then back on. Start with it bypassed. Yeah, it makes a really big difference. And we're being gentle with all of these settings. We could be compressing these bands more, but we're trying to keep the fiddle sounding natural and just getting out of the way a little bit of the vocal. And then in the next video, we'll get into doing this similar process, but directly sidechaining to the vocal. But there you go. Those dynamic EQs are super helpful. Dynamic EQs work better than multi-band compressors because you can be more specific and more targeted with them. The masking is coming from our brain's tendency to filter certain things out, but when it can't, then you have competing focus going on. And as engineers, what we're trying to do is make a nice, pleasant listening experience and get people to be able to hear what we want them to hear without having to strain. So I hope you enjoyed that, and check out the links down in the description. And if you want to hear more about these topics, check out the Patreon. I think we have about 3 hours of Q&A over there now for just $5 a month, and we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, and you get a chance to get your specific questions answered and see more of these explanations in more detail. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if there's any other topic you want me to tackle, and I'll catch you all on the next one.